Web of Conspiracy. Here is your host, Adam Webb.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. It is great to be back with you here now after just about a month off the air. Once again, my apologies for that. I'll get into that shortly as to the details of my break away from the show. But I have some exciting things planned here for the future of the show, and I'll be getting into that as we progress as well. A few announcements here real quick. Before I had went on break, I had released an app for the Android for the show, and I am welcoming any kind of feedback. I'm not 100% certain that I'm going to stick with this particular application maker. So I'm really looking for some feedback from the audience for those of you who have Android devices, and would love to be able to find out what you think of it, if you like the layout of it. If you don't, it's really important that I get some solid feedback on that, because I'm not sure if I want to continue forward with that particular app maker. If in fact I get a lot of positive feedback, then I'll move forward with an iPhone app as well. So I'm really welcoming and encouraging your feedback for those of you who have tried out the Android app. So please let me know. Send me an email, webofconspiracy@gmail.com. I would really welcome the feedback on the app. A couple other pleas for feedback. The show, for those of you who have been listening to me for a while, know that, of course, I broadcast through Spreaker, but it's also distributed through a number of other outlets. I distribute the show through YouTube. I distribute the show through iTunes, and I think that's where the majority of the people do listen to the show. I also distribute the show through Stitcher Radio on demand. So I would love for any of you who, if you really love the show, I'd love for you to take the time to write up a review on wherever it is that you listen to the show through. That way, if the more reviews I get, the better likelihood that I get featured. In the course of the show gets featured, then I get more listeners and can attract a larger audience. So I would love to be able to have the show featured as much as possible. So for that to happen, I need, for those of you who have continued to support the show and listen to the show over the last several months, to take the time, 5 minutes, write up a quick review on the format of which you listen, and help the show out any way you can. So, as I said, YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, even through Spreaker, by all means. For those of you who are native listeners directly through Spreaker, you can do so there as well. So, before I get into the specifics of today's show, those of you who know, I've taken off probably about a solid month here off of the show. I apologize for that. It really was not my intention to take this long of a break, but I was forced with a situation where I had a number of deadlines that I needed to make in terms of my work outside of the show. And those required a great deal of attention for me and greater amounts of time than I would have been able to dedicate to it had I been doing the show as well. So in trying to figure out what all I was going to sacrifice, what all I was going to have to give, unfortunately the show had to be the thing that had to give for the moment. I had every intention of coming back on August 29th, so here I am. That being said, the work that I was doing, I had a couple different projects, but one of the particular pieces that I was working on was a strategies for building a peaceful society. And of course, for those of you who listened to the show the last couple weeks or so before I went on break, know that I certainly talked about the situation in Israel and with Palestine, and of course the situation in the Ukraine. Very stressful times that we're living in, and the research that I have conducted is going to go towards a number of other. It's going towards a number of nonprofit organizations and non-governmental organizations in efforts to try to promote and create peace in areas where there has not been traditionally a great deal of peace. So I'm really hopeful that some of this effort and this work that I put into will have some longer lasting and sustaining effects. I know at least one non-governmental agency that's working diligently in Asia is going to directly work with the research that I've done. So I'm very hopeful that what I put together will certainly help, but that required a great deal of my time, and so I just want to thank you for being patient. And for those of you, here's the other thing that really amazed me is the number of people who tuned into the show. And for those of you who are new, welcome to the show. And hopefully you'll enjoy some of these new episodes as I embark, I guess, on what I would refer to as season 2 of the Web of Conspiracy. I certainly didn't anticipate taking that long of a break, but it needed to be done. So, as I said, hopefully the energy and the effort that I put forward into that project will have larger dividends and pay off greater down the line. But once again, thank you for those who started listening, as well as to those of you who went back and listened to some of the old shows. I really was amazed to see just how many people were still listening to the show, even though I wasn't producing new content. So just a big thank you for all of you who did take my advice and went back into the archives with 35 episodes, essentially, really maybe more like 34. It was really great to be able to see people come back and listen to some of the old stuff and get familiar with that, and it's really cool. So once again, thank you for all of you who continue to support the show. That being said, I do have one little other side note personally that I wanted to mention here on the program. For those of you who been listening to me since the show began back in November of last year, and even possibly for those of you who listened before on the old network that the show was on, know that I went through a situation where I was battling cancer, particularly malignant melanoma. So that being said, you'll know that it's been somewhat of a up and down year for me. However, everything is all good there on my front, and that's fantastic. However, my wife is currently undergoing a bit of a medical scare of her own. I won't go into the details as to what it is. However, it could potentially be serious. So I'm asking for those of you who are of the religious kind to offer your prayers if you're willing to helping my wife through this time. And my family has been in certainly a stressful period. We're hopeful that everything is going to be okay, and we have every reason to think that it will be, but nevertheless, it's the testing processes and the anxiety and the waiting that goes into it. So for those of you, I would ask for your thoughts and your prayers for my wife right now, as this is a little bit of a difficult time that we're going through. So once again, thank you for those of you who continue to support the show. That's why I've been very excited waiting for this day to get back. So it's great to be back with you here. And I'm going to focus more now on some of the other traditional aspects of what I talk about. I've spent more than enough time in this episode back talking about the show. So I want to dedicate now and transition to some of the news items, at least a couple of the news items that caught my attention. Over the last month, as I was trying to, think about, okay, when I come back, and believe me, even though I wasn't actively researching for the show for a few weeks, and I wasn't actively working on the show, I spent a significant amount of time when I would see the news or listening to the news that I was, okay, well, what are some of the things I'm going to talk about? What are some of these big stories that I'm going to talk about? What are the things that am I going to mention when I come back? And of course, I spent a lot of time on the war and the conflict in across the United States and the world and all that, and the situation in Missouri. Of course, there's a number of things I could talk about, but I really wanted to focus on one particular story that it's of more of the paranormal variety. So that being said, this is a story that has sort of been buried. It hasn't gotten a whole lot of media attention, and that's one of the more recent findings of the Curiosity rover. Okay, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Curiosity rover is, it's of course the unmanned rover that is currently very slowly rolling around the surface of Mars and taking back some pretty amazing pictures, right? And I know I've mentioned the rover before. There's been some very anomalous type of things that have occurred. Strange balls of light, which scientists believe may have just been reflection, may have just been sunlight. They believe that there's natural explanations for a lot of this. And then, of course, the other issue with Mars that has been going on for a number of years have been unusual images that appear to look as if though they are more or less maybe perhaps some structures that are man-made. Okay, certainly the face on Mars, many believed, and that there's something to that perhaps that's not really just a natural phenomenon. Interestingly enough, a recent picture, and it kind of caught a little bit of fire, but once, as I said, mainstream media didn't touch it. And it's this picture taken from the Curiosity rover of what appears to be a striking resemblance to a thigh bone. I'm not exactly sure the technical term. I believe that is perhaps a femur, a human femur, on the surface of Mars. And it does bear a very striking resemblance. Now, what is it for certain? I don't know. However, there's enough. I am of the belief that life existed on Mars at one point. Now, at this time, do I believe it does? Probably not. However, definitively, we cannot say. At this point, certainly nothing has, if there were any type of beings, I would imagine they would have made some sort of an effort to come out and see what this little thing rolling around in this crater is. So I don't know that there's any life there now, at least advanced extraterrestrial life. However, I am of the belief that perhaps there was something there at one time. And this thigh bone is a very curious picture. Perhaps it is just a uniquely shaped stone. It may be. I can't prove it one way or another. Nevertheless, it's very startling, and I'm going to try to find a picture and post it up on the social media pages for everyone to check out. But it is a rather startling image, and it's one that makes you ponder. Also in the news, there have been now scientists beginning to believe something that I said as a little kid learning about our solar system, and that's that the asteroid belt that resides between Mars and Jupiter was in fact at one time a planet that suffered some sort of catastrophic destruction, and is now, the debris is turned into this asteroid field. I for some reason, as a little kid, I always believed this to be true, and now scientists believe that would seem to be all likelihood how that asteroid belt was created. That was a more recent, at least, discovery, so to speak. So, a little bit of vindication for the 6-7-year-old me. Okay, the other news item, and this is going to be the main topic for the show today, and it's one that I believe is controversial, and I know that some of my listeners are going to disagree vehemently, and I respect that. And certainly when I get into the conspiracy realm, I tend to be very cautious. I tend to be very careful with how many of these conspiracies I really jump right into. For those of you who listen, you know that I tend to dismiss most of the conspiracies I run across, and I think rightfully so. I think we have to be very careful when we talk about conspiracies. That being said, the reason this show is entitled The Web of Conspiracy is because there have been more than a few times when conspiracies have turned out to be true. Okay? And as a result, we cannot dismiss every conspiracy that comes along, because 90% of those conspiracies, or 95% of those conspiracies, or even 99% of those conspiracies turn out to be complete and utter garbage. It's the fact that there are many that turn out to, in fact, be true. And that is the reason why conspiracy has taken such a hold into the population, certainly in the United States, and I know abroad. I know that that's certainly the case. And with looking at just the sheer numbers of listeners that I have across the globe. I know that it's not just a phenomenon of the United States. There is an element of truth in most conspiracy, and that is the reason why it's important that we flush them out. It's important that we take the time to actually have a discussion about them without dismissing them out of hand. Now, today's conspiracy topic is one, of course, derived very recently from the news, and that is the Ebola virus. Okay? The Ebola conspiracy. Now, there are many people who look at these virus conspiracies and completely dismiss them. Fair enough. I mean, if that's how you feel about it and you do not want to listen further, then I understand. So be it. But I would urge you, before you turn off, to at least listen to the details that I have here. Listen to some of the work that I've conducted in my professional career, okay, outside of this, and then make a judgment on whether or not you think we should completely dismiss the idea that this virus conspiracy exists, okay? Now, of course, the Ebola virus received a lot of mainstream attention when 2 American aid workers in Africa contracted the virus and then were flown back to the United States to the Centers of Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, and were treated. Now, before I get into their specific story, I want to provide a little bit of backstory here on this virus, okay? This is what we know about the Ebola, and this is derived directly from the CDC. So before everybody jumps on me and says I have a garbage timeline here, this is directly from the CDC themselves, okay? The first formal recognition of the disease, of this virus, by the CDC occurred in 1976, okay? It's recent. It is a very recent development, and it is essentially 38 years old, okay? And it was first appeared in what is known now as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, okay? Now, this particular original outbreak was reported to have infected 318 people in 1976. Okay, and it was spread by close contact and the use of contaminated needles and syringes in hospitals and clinics. Okay, for those of you who are unfamiliar with, you'll know that the conditions of medical facilities in Africa are not great. And there's a reason why we send the number of aid workers that we do, and we work very hard and diligently to try to change the perception of disease and viruses in Africa. Many people do not believe in viruses. Many of the indigenous tribes throughout Africa do not believe in viruses. They believe it is a punishment from God or the gods. They believe that it's something incredibly, entirely supernatural. They do not believe that in any sort of scientific evidence or scientific ideations. They don't have an understanding or a conceptualization of virus. They don't believe in it. Okay? So, that being said, something like this would spread incredibly rapidly through Africa, much as the HIV virus, which developed at almost the same time as the Ebola virus. Keep that in mind. Then, Ebola spread, and in the same year, there was yet another outbreak in the Sudan. This time there were 284 cases that were reported cases, and that's important because there may have been many that were not, or many believed to be some other sort of sickness, such as a yellow fever or something along those lines, and was never properly reported. So then, the outbreak in the Sudan reappears in the same area, and the CDC describes it as a recurrent outbreak of the 1976 virus. This time it only kills 34. Now, for all intents and purposes, the virus completely disappears for 15 years. 15 years, this thing disappears. Now, that being said, there were things that were the virus, which had mutated at that point, that was discovered in some monkeys that were imported from the Philippines in 1990. And there were a few workers that developed antibodies in that time period, but never actually developed the disease. Okay? So there were reported cases of it being discovered in monkeys on what appears to be 4 occasions between 1979 and 1994. Now, in 1994, Ebola resurfaces. And this is in the Gabon in Africa. Only 52 cases at this point. Then we have another surge in 1995, over 300. At that point, though, the numbers decrease down again. Okay, 37 reported cases in the Gabon in 96, 60 in 97 in the same area. And then it virtually disappears until 2000, 2001, when it resurfaces in Uganda. Another 400 plus people are infected there. And then we have another tail off with occasional bumps in the couple hundreds in 2007 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And everything remained very curtailed up until March of 2014. And we're now at confirmed 1,500 cases and believed to be probably closer to over 20,000 when this is done. Now, yes, for those of you who are going to ask about viruses and things of this nature, yes, there is a cyclical nature to them, to be sure. Okay? I cannot help but find it very peculiar that there was such a long, significant disappearance of the virus. And that is a little unusual, okay? To go 15 years after you've had hundreds in areas that were infected, that obviously, whatever this original source, it would have had to come from somewhere. And then all of a sudden, after what appearing to be completely gone, just automatically resurfaces. Now, we know that the virus mutated, and there are now 5 different versions of this virus. That much is known for sure. Okay? There's the Ebola virus, the Sudan virus, the Reston virus, the Thai forest virus, and the what is referred to, and I'll do my best to pronounce this right, the Bundibugyo virus. Okay? And I'm not sure that I pronounced that right. For those of you who actually formally know the name of that, I apologize. But there are 5 known strains of the Ebola virus. Okay? So what is Ebola? Well, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it is a viral hemorrhagic fever. Of course, hemorrhagic referring to bleeding from numerous places. Okay? The disease is often fatal. It includes symptoms that are, in many cases, flu-like. You have fever, severe headache, muscle pain, weakness, diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain, loss of appetite. However, this, of course, as it progresses, you begin to develop unexplained bleeding and bruising. Okay, so it's not a pleasant experience for anybody to go through. It is believed at this point, the common belief, even though they're not certain, was that the virus was started by a bat, an infected bat that had bit someone. Now, this is where the conspiracy begins to start. Okay, many people believe that there's a conspiracy attached to the disease. And I'm going to go out on the limb and say I believe that is for a good reason. Okay? As I had stated earlier, we look at the case of the American aid workers, right? Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Wright-Bolt. Now, they both developed the Ebola virus, contracted it, while working in the same hospital. The CDC transferred them through this very sophisticated airplane to isolate them in efforts to make sure that they don't spread the Ebola to anybody else once they arrive in the United States, and began working on this experimental treatment, okay, and were then subsequently discharged from the hospital last week. Now, the first question that we have to ask ourselves, okay, is why did the CDC bring them back to the United States? Well, one of the explanations is, of course, our facilities, our people are, of course, greater in terms of better facilities, better education, better prepared to handle something like this. And that is true. That is absolutely true. However, there are those who think that there's a very less than spectacular reason as to why they would have brought them back here. There are those who believe that, well, the intention was in an effort to try to start Ebola here. I'm not exactly sure that I buy into that, but let me progress here. There are a number of medical professionals and scientists that believe that Ebola is a man-made virus. Okay? They believe that it was constructed in a lab and released into an area where population control was needed and people would not be as concerned. Okay? That Africa would be the greatest place to try these bioweapons. Okay? These experimental viruses that mimic regular viruses that would not start or spread any kind of alarm that we're doing some sort of large-scale biological weapon attack, the way that an anthrax attack would, okay? That this was an attempt to basically try to put this all together in an effort to create this situation where people would be victims and no one would know any different. We create a weapon in which would not create any type of a large-scale alarm that this is a weapon other than just a virus, like the Spanish influenza, something along those lines. Of course, the same theories have been put forth about HIV. And ironically enough, if you look at the timeline, HIV and Ebola both spread out of Africa at approximately the same time. So you have to wonder, strange coincidence? Well, for those of you who listen to the show, you know that I don't do the coincidence thing. I believe that there's something perhaps more going on here. So, people may ask, well, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody create something like this in a lab and then release it? Well, or why would a group of people, as some would believe, such as the New World Order or something like this, do something like that? Create and try to systematically destroy groups of people? Well, we certainly have plenty of historical evidence of mankind doing this before. All we need to do is look at the genocides in Nazi Germany and in Armenia to understand that that is not outside the realm of possibility for mankind. Okay? I think we tend to have a very nearsighted approach to just how depraved mankind can be. Now, for those of you who have been listening to the show for a while, you'll know that early on, I believe it was probably in the first or second, I mean, it's one of my very early episodes of the show. I did a program dedicated to the Georgia Guidestones, which I think are fascinating. And all in all, I think wholly good. However, one of the Guidestone rules is a little kind of unnerving for many people. And that's this idea that for humanity to achieve proper balance, that population must be kept under 500 million people, okay? 500 million people, under half of that amount, under 500 million people. I can't talk, I apologize. keep the population under 500 million people to achieve perpetual balance on the earth. Okay? So there are those who look at that kind of statement and then look at these perhaps engineered viruses, and then look at the destruction they have caused in a country like Africa where they don't believe in viruses. Okay? And they don't use any kind of protection, condoms, anything like that to prevent the transfer of disease sexually. And of course, what is one of the primary ways Ebola is transferred? Through sexual contact. What is the primary way that HIV is contracted? Through sexual contact. Now, of course, both of those can be contracted through the blood as well. But that being said, they both spread in a very similar manner. So the question that you have to ask here is that, are these viruses truly randomly springing up out of nowhere? Okay? Or are they a targeted attack on groups of people? And that is where the question lies. Okay? There are, as I said, many who believe this is biowarfare. This is an effort to bring down the African populations, particularly in a post-colonial world where all these other Western nations that used to have interests and had controlling power in these areas have subsequently lost their ability to control these regions, at least effectively, through governments, and their best bets are to create an atmosphere of instability, right? Make these regions unstable. Bring them down through something like a disease, right? Look at what smallpox did to the Native Americans. Decimated them. Why not do that to the Africans? Africa is the perfect place to distribute these kinds of viruses. It is the perfect breeding grounds. Now, that being said, there are those who argue that Ebola is not the perfect virus to create a population thinning apparatus. And perhaps that's true. It is sensitive to sunlight. And it does not last as long without a host. And it kills pretty quickly. So it cannot reach maximum amounts of people. But what we don't know is how many of these types of viruses were tested, released, and in an attempt to see if they work or not. Maybe one winds up being better than the other and one doesn't work as effectively. And perhaps Ebola is the failure. Perhaps HIV was the success. The other thing is that many of these medical professionals who believe that there is something to this claimed before this happened that there was in fact a cure, believed that there was a cure for Ebola. And the fact that the CDC was willing to risk as much as they were willing to risk by bringing these American patients home, and a couple weeks later, they're recovered. There would appear to have been a cure. Let me put it to you this way. When you're conducting experiments, and particularly with people, you have to be careful. There's a certain set of ethics and guidelines that you have to follow. Okay? For the CDC to go through what they went through, to take the risks that they took, they had strong reason to believe that this treatment would be effective. Very strong reason to believe that this treatment would be effective. Leading many to believe that they've had the cure this whole time. So now the question becomes, where will this cure go from here? Will it be effective in these African regions? Will the medical facilities and the professionals that are working there be able to effectively send this cure? I don't know. What I do know is that the CDC is very careful about saying about how effective this is. Well, to me, it looks like it's pretty damn effective. Okay? You had reports that both of them, particularly Dr. Brantley, turned for I mean, it would appear that he was near death, and this treatment brought him back. So for this to work so effectively, when they claim that they've tested this in the past and it didn't, I have reason to believe that that is a misconception and perhaps a bold-faced lie. I do believe that they have had this cure for Ebola for a while. And there are many who report that they've discovered patents on file from a few years ago supporting this. And while I question the veracity of those patent reports, nevertheless, I cannot help but believe that there is perhaps something to this, that perhaps they have been sitting on a cure for Ebola for a few years. So, the question begs, what exactly are these? What was the purpose of these viruses? As I said, many believe it's biowarfare. Okay? And it certainly seems like that could be the case. There are others, however, and this is something that I followed particularly in my work outside of the show, the idea of what is catching on to and being referred to as a SIMAD. Okay? A SIMAD being SIMAD. And this is a single individual massively destructive. That perhaps we're looking at a lone individual with the access to resources and the intellect to be able to create these types of weapons. And believe me, this is a concern internationally. SIMADs are an issue internationally. Governments are aware, and they are concerned. And they are putting together strategies as we speak on how to effectively handle people like that. Okay? So the idea that perhaps a lone individual who maybe was ideologically driven, maybe created something to attack vulnerable populations in the third world, such as Africans, and perhaps maybe even in other regions. What we do know is that it's certainly taken root in Africa, and given that we're looking at 20,000 plus probably when this is said and done, it's going to spread throughout Africa. If we get to the point where we're talking about 20,000 people infected, good luck. Good luck keeping this from not becoming a pandemic, meaning global. Right now, it seems as though it is fairly isolated. I'm not sure that is going to maintain at this point. I think that we need to be very concerned. And I think that we need to be questioning why this treatment suddenly worked when the CDC claims that it hasn't worked. We need to be asking these questions. We need to be putting the questions out there to the CDC as to why would such a risk be taken. And I know a number of people were very concerned. And we're taking a chance of bringing a disease to the United States that is potentially fatal and could spread incredibly rapidly in the population in the United States as well. Yet the CDC spared no expense to save the lives of 2 Americans. Unfortunately, Barack Obama was not able to do that for those who were killed in the Libyan embassy in Benghazi. It's a shame. It really is. I'm sure that they would have loved to have had the same sort of emergency response. Not that I'm suggesting that those Americans infected with Ebola should have been left to die, but it's times like that you have to kind of scratch your head and figure out what the hell is actually going on around here. It's these kinds of things that make you begin to wonder, what is the purpose, what is the ends to all of these conspiracies? And I'm not sure that the SIMAD is the answer with Ebola, but I do know that it's a concern as we move forward. One other intriguing theory that certainly there is no evidence of, at least no hard scientific evidence anyways, and that's this idea that these viruses are actually of extraterrestrial origin. Now, I am skeptical of this, to be sure, even though for those of you listening for a while know that I do believe that there's intelligent extraterrestrial life out there. I'm not convinced that this is something that was created by an alien in an effort to thin our population on planet Earth. However, who knows? There are a number of people who go back through time and claim that the Black Plague, for instance, was also of extraterrestrial origin. A number of strange stories in those times that people would see what they described as looking like the Grim Reaper, and was in the fields with their scythe, and some sort of mist was spraying out of their scythes, right? There's strange reports of that throughout, and I know that there was an individual who is a proponent of the ancient astronaut theory who wrote a book called The Gods of Eden, who believes that that the Black Plague was of extraterrestrial origin, and that perhaps and postulates that perhaps some other viruses and other illnesses are as well. And, of course, those who believe that have taken up the cause here with Ebola, believing that perhaps this is also of otherworldly origin, right? While I can't say definitively that it's true, it certainly would be intriguing if it was. I tend to be of the belief, at least in this particular conspiracy, that this was done as an effort to create a bioweapon. And this was done in a controlled lab, perhaps via at least one organization, perhaps multiple organizations working together. And it's either accidentally was released or was purposefully released. And it was released into an area that would be prime for attack, which leads me to believe that it was purposeful. And if that's the case, then we have yet another attempt at a genocide. Now, look, definitive, hardcore proof, it's hard to find in most conspiracies. And for good reason. That being said, if this is an organized effort, we're not going to find the evidence, because these individuals or groups of individuals are going to have enough power and resources to make sure that it never reaches back to them. And of course, they've created something that would do just that. It would never show any sort of real way of being able to prove that it was man-made, especially if you can make it appear as if, though, it came from a bat. I know that there are techniques, but if you're looking at and you're working with the top, some of the top scientists and researchers in the world trying to develop bioweapons, they're going to do their best to create something that is not only going to be destructive, but is not going to look suspicious. And I cannot help but believe that that is what we're looking at here. And furthermore, I cannot help but believe that we're looking at a situation where a cure has been known and has been had, and has not been released until just now. So, well, that is what I have on the Season 2 premiere of The Web of Conspiracy. I just want to thank everybody for continuing to support the show. I would not continue to do this if it weren't for you listening, so thank you. Once again, I ask for those of you, if you love the show, please review the show on any format in which you listen. The reviews help the show get featured and help attract more listeners, and that would be fantastic. So please take a few minutes to do that if you get the chance and the opportunity. I would be greatly appreciative. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions for the show, also feel free to email me at webofconspiracy@gmail.com. Once again, that is webofconspiracy@gmail.com. Okay? Now, I have some really exciting news for next week. I'm going to have the very first guest on the Web of Conspiracy next week, and that is photojournalist Jarrett Gardner, who has conducted some pretty amazing research in regards to the Great Pyramids in Giza and in Egypt. So we're going to get into that then on the next episode next Friday. So be sure to check that out. And I'll be posting links and everything appropriate to him as we get closer to the show. But once again, next week, Jarrett Gardner will be the guest on the Web of Conspiracy. thank you once again for continuing to support the show over the last month, and continue to do some great things here with the show as move forward going on here in the coming months. So once again, thank you, and have a great week.